We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down.
Well, hello, and welcome to episode 81 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton, and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swadling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, how you doing?
Oh, good. Thank you, Dan. I'm feeling refreshed and revigorated.
Splendid. Well, we're delighted today to be joined by Councillor Robert Ward. Robert is the Conservative Councillor for Selsdon and Addington Village Ward here in Croydon. Robert, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Dan. Good to be here.
So, Mike, what have we got to talk about today?
So we're talking about Nicola Sturgeon's resignation, the proposed ULEZ expansion in London, and the proposed 15% council tax increase here in Croydon.
Yes, the Nicola of the North, she gone. She's been in a spot of bother recently on a number of issues. Supreme Court ruled that she couldn't bypass the British government and have a indie ref too. NHS is in bother in Scotland, and some we'll call them financial issues within the SNP. But yeah, she's at this whole gender recognition bill issue that seems to have blown up in her face quite a bit. And with polls going in the wrong direction for her, she seems to have pulled a Jacinda Ardern and decided that there's not enough fuel left in the tank, and and now she's stepping down. Mike, were you surprised by this development?
I was. I know there's been some rumours circulating about the trouble she's in, but I confess to not paying always that close attention to Scottish politics. So yeah, it came as quite a shock to me. But that aside, it's a real I think a joyous moment. I spent a lot of time in Scotland, and it felt in Edinburgh particularly, and it felt quite a fun, enjoyable place, despite the perhaps the reputation of the Scots. It's actually a fun, joyous place. And everything the SNP government has done, from minimum alcohol pricing to the increased lockdowns over even the excessive ones we had in England, and so on, has been restrictive, and it's been unpleasant, I think. So yeah, good riddance.
Robert, I know it's not quite your job to comment upon Scottish matters, but what have you made of this of Nicola Sturgeon's time in office and her decision to step down?
Happy to comment on it. Yes, I was. I lived in Aberdeen for quite 7 or 8 years, something like that. I actually voted in the Scottish referendum in 1997 on whether there should be a Scottish Parliament and whether it should have tax raising powers. I voted for both of those. It was certainly at the time, in Scotland, the independence issue was there all the time, and I felt that this would perhaps solve the problem. Now, it may well, it's certainly very arguable that it hasn't, and it's made things worse. But at the time, yes, and I was absolutely of the view that they should have tax raising powers. Unfortunately, what Scotland has done is they've done like local authorities tend to do when they're of the opposite party, particularly if it's a Conservative government and it's a Labour council. They just whatever they do is great, even if it's been done by the government or paid for by the government, and whatever's bad is because the government hasn't given us enough money. And Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP have played that card, doubled and vulnerable. And yes, I've been surprised how big a majority of the SNP were able to get. The Constitution was designed to make it difficult to get to that party in absolute power in Scotland, but they successfully did it. And Alex Salmond, I went to see a couple of times when I was there, and he is an extremely able politician. I mean, brilliant, up in the sort of Tony Blair league, in my view, irrespective of what their policies are. Nicola Sturgeon I was less impressed with. I think she was able to take it over and have a rather vice-like control of the SNP, which I don't think Alex Salmond had. I agree with Mike that they've always gone for the most restrictive and left-wing agenda of control by government, and I believe at the moment the Greens they need the Greens to vote for things in order to get them through, which was always going to make things worse. I'm surprised she's gone. You know, she didn't seem exhausted. You know, 8 years is some time, but so my first thought was there is something else going on other than just the gender recognition thing, and there's a sort of where is £600,000 gone thing about her husband, about which I have no knowledge, but there's things bubbling around in the background about which I don't really know whether they're true or not. But I agree with Mike. I think it's a good thing that she has gone. One always is a bit worried on these things. Be careful what you wish for. But yeah, I'm on the same page as Mike.
So yeah, obviously with Sturgeon stepping down, there'll be a new SNP leader, indeed, therefore new First Minister. One or two people have put their names forward so far. I believe Hamza Yousaf has put his name forward, but there's another couple of candidates or potential candidates who may do so. In the meantime, Alex Salmond is sort of wants to get the independence movement back together. He's calling for unity and what have you. This which is a bit much given his previous record. But I do wonder whether what comes next will damage the independence cause, because some of these potential candidates, although I'm sure they all agree with Scottish independence, as it were, they do have quite different ideas about how the country should be run, and certainly have some very different ideas in terms of some are more socially liberal than others, shall we say. So it'll be interesting to see what actually happens with the Scottish independence movement, and whether their cause is strengthened by what goes on, or whether it's damaged. Certainly the polls in recent weeks have been very much in favour of Scotland remaining in the United Kingdom. Mike, do you have any views on how this is going to work out for the movement?
Yeah, I think they I don't know. It may well be better for the movement in the long run, in that Nicola Sturgeon was a blocker to change. She was clearly completely out of touch. I was away recently, and maybe I'll mention an article I wrote later, in Jerusalem. I went to a couple of places where men and women were separated. And I was on tour groups, and not one thought this was an issue, or was confused by it, or even jokingly raised it up as a kind of, oh, that's a bit bad. It was just, yeah, that's how it is, and we all understood the difference. If Nicola had understood the difference, maybe she'd still be in a job. And I think there's an element here of just how out of touch the SNP leadership is, and the people of Scotland are on this and probably many other issues. I don't hear the limited amount I know about all these different people running for the Scottish SNP leadership. I'm not hearing any of them talking about a plan for growth. I don't seem to think anyone wants a plan for growth. And the SNP's strategy seems to have been to restrict growth and blame England, as Robert said, and use that as a way to say this is why we need independence. What might actually work for them, although I don't see where it's coming from, is this crazy idea that they actually grow the economy and say, look, we can do this on our own. And that would be good for the people of Scotland. It would be good for the people of Britain. But I don't see where that's coming.
Yeah, there are those people who believe that the SNP has effectively tried to run the country into the ground because they think they'll benefit somehow by, as you say, blaming the UK government, and somehow that will get them across the line in terms of independence. But I mean, so one other thing really is that, if the SNP does go through a period of infighting, which I think is to some extent inevitable, it's just a question of how open it is, and so they perhaps go backwards in the polling in terms of political parties. I'll put this to you, Robert, if I may. If the SNP goes backwards in Scotland, who do you think will benefit the most? Which party? And dare I say, does it make a Labour majority in 2024 on the UK general election? Does it make it even more likely?
Yeah, I guess short answer is, and I'll do a bit of politicians waffle stuff, but is I don't really know. I mean, I lived outside of Aberdeen in Aberdeenshire, and it was quite some time ago, although I still keep in touch. The thing that surprised me most when I was up in Scotland, there were the fervent independence people, and they were, well, in my judgment, fairly small in number, the zealots. But you know, I did have friends up there and people who worked for me, and I you know, in one-to-ones, I would say, look, some of the stuff they were saying there was absolute nonsense, but nobody is speaking up. Nobody says anything, and you know, even then, people who I knew well would just stare at their shoes. So you know, people who thought differently were too frightened. I think that's one of the things that worries me most about where we are in general here, is that there are a lot of issues where people are frightened to speak up and say, look, what you're saying is nonsense. Like, you know, men and women going into different bits, and that there's some sort of argument if everybody goes into one or other of those. It's so I don't know. I'm hopeful that the Conservatives will benefit. We are the overtly unionist party. I think the union is best for both Scotland and England. The trouble has been that by complaining like they have done, Scotland have ended up getting a bigger share of the pie than they otherwise would have. I mean, remember when it looked like the Scottish independence referendum might go the wrong way, David Cameron said, oh, well, we'll keep the Barnett formula. Well, the Barnett formula was written decades ago and was never intended to be long term, but it favours Scotland. And we're stuck with that. Now, nobody ever wants to get less money, but you know, the local authorities make the same argument. If you get more than the average, people say keep quiet, and if you get less, you moan incessantly. But someone somewhere has to draw a line. So I'm hopeful. Well, I think it'll be more like England. You'll get the rural areas will be more Conservative, and the urban areas will be more Labour-y. But what the balance between those two is, remember, Scotland should get less MPs with the boundary review. So I'm hopeful that it will benefit the Conservatives, but I'm by no means sure of that.
No, well, you know, you mentioned how these devolved assemblies, parliaments, etc., sometimes go about their business. We see, you know, Wales doesn't fare too well either in some of these instances. And Mike, what's the First Minister of Wales been up to? What's he been banning recently?
Well, Wales is now talking about effectively banning any new roads because of the environmental impact and the need for assessments into them and what have you. Now, again, it's similar to the issue in Scotland. What's the government of Wales doing? And Wales is a poor part of the United Kingdom, economically, you know, deprived in quite large areas. Very, very poor public transport. Some beautiful places that you could imagine could get a lot of tourism in. Some areas where there are highly skilled but low cost workers. But you can't get your goods to market if you can't get down the road. So what are they doing? Banning new roads. It's just balmy. Robert said something earlier about, you know, when the opposite party's in power, they just blame the government. I'm a fan of devolution, but I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that we should only devolve what you raise taxes for. And if you're not raising, if you need central government funding, it doesn't get devolved, because that's all they do is blame someone else. And Wales should pay the consequences for what is a very weird decision.
Robert, how do you think devolution works in within the United Kingdom in terms of, obviously we've mentioned Scotland and Wales? There's some level of devolution into some authorities in England. How do you think that's working out?
Well, I'm of the same view as Mike, that if if you devolve the paying for it, then people can know what they're voting for. That is one of the big problems, and it's true of other countries too. I lived on a couple of occasions in Holland. I was speaking recently to a Dutchman who's familiar with both the Netherlands and here. And I had the impression when I was over there that people had a clearer idea of what the local council did and how it was paid for. And he said, well, I've seen both the UK and Holland, and I don't think people there have got any idea either. People here don't know what the council does. And the problem you've got is that things like social services, I think, are better delivered by the council. You know, we know the borough, we know its people, we know all the nooks and crannies of the close to 400,000 people where they live in Croydon. The trouble is that is a very big bill, and government pays for most of it. And so yes, if they can, in principle, you want to do that. Whether you can get a workable situation in which that happens, I don't know. I would love to hear of an example where a decent-sized country has devolved it. I mean, in principle and instinctively, I say, okay, local people should determine their own destiny. The trouble is, there is a tendency, as we see in the urban areas, particularly where there's a lot of demand for social services, is that people will vote Labour, and the expectation is, well, somebody else will pay for it. So I struggle to see a model that I can see work. So we muddle through, and whether we can make our muddling a little bit better, I don't know. In the case of Wales, I mean, I worked a lot in Wales quite many moons ago when I worked for the railways, and yes, it's really quite post-industrial. That the Talbot Steelworks was still a big thing then, and you've got West Wales and up the valleys there where they really are very nice, very pleasant places, but jobs are hard to come by. I don't follow Mark Drakeford and Wales very much, but I strongly suspect it's very similar, or perhaps even worse than Scotland. It's the old thing, you know, when socialism doesn't work, the excuse is that they didn't do enough of it, and I'm afraid Wales may well end up paying the price.
Well, one place where there's a certain level of devolution is, of course, London, with our London Mayor Sadiq Khan and the Greater London Assembly. And Mr. Khan's been up to some tricks recently with the announcement that the ultra-low emission zone, which currently covers basically inner London, is being expanded to the whole of London in August this year. So if your car is not up to scratch in terms of the emission levels, and there's some debate about what that actually means, but you'll be paying £12.50 a day just to drive around the streets where you live. Well, this hasn't gone down well with many local residents, and I believe we're now up to 5 councils who are going to challenge the mayor. They're taking legal action against him. Those are the London boroughs of Bexley, Bromley, Harrow, Hillingdon, and they have been joined by Surrey County Council, who are joining in with the legal action. We've even had some Labour MPs for some of the outer London constituencies who are arguing against it. I understand Croydon won't be getting involved in the legal action though, because they, as you know, don't have any money. Mike, what's going on with this?
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, the ULEZ expansion is going to affect a lot of people, and surprisingly, you know, there's a lot of people who have a second car they keep for dirty jobs or for maybe a little bit of work on the side and what have you. People, I'm surprised at how many people I talk to who do have a problem with the ULEZ and have a vehicle that will be impacted by it. And let's just think for a moment what this is trying to encourage. It's trying to encourage that we have perfectly good working vehicles, an item of value, an item of you know, someone's wealth, if you like, that's there and working fine, and that we scrap it and throw it away so we can build a new thing to replace it with. Which in just doing that, if this was really about a green changes, that would release a huge amount of carbon and other emissions into the atmosphere and soils and what have you. And would have thrown away an item of value in the process, which just seems absolutely bonkers, preposterous way of doing things. Dan, as you know, you were there. We had a sort of street stall. We were out leafleting, trying to raise some interest against ULEZ. I don't think we had to try that hard. There's a very strong feeling around this way, and this is in the south of the borough, against ULEZ. I think that will prove pretty bad for a lot of Labour politicians if this goes through. And the other thing I've noticed interestingly with it is it brings together two groups. There's the kind of normal sort of man or woman on the Clapham omnibus who's not that fussed, but now is going to have to pay a tax and is upset about it. But the whole kind of freedom movement, the people that were against lockdowns or against 15-minute cities, who are maybe not so numerous, but are very agitated about anything that's really stopping our right to get around. So yeah, it's bad news, and but at least there's a good opposition coming together.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of opposition, and hopefully it can be mobilised appropriately. There's been some reports emerging overnight that the UK government is considering whether or not it has the opportunity to block the expansion. They're weighing up to see if they believe that Khan has exceeded his powers. So we'll see if they do to Khan what they did to Sturgeon in terms of the Gender Recognition Act. As I say, Croydon Council has decided it can't get involved because it doesn't have the cash, which is probably fair enough, to be honest with you. But Robert, what's the sort of feeling within the council about the ULEZ expansion?
Well, a couple of things start off with. I do have a non-compliant car, so we politicians always have to declare an interest. So I have a car that, were it 6 months younger, it would be okay, but I'm pre the model change, so I do have a non-compliant car, but I could afford to change it. I don't want to. It's one of our best loved cars, and my wife has looked after it very much. Within the council, to be clear, the mayor declined to sign what's called a Section 8 agreement, so to allow Sadiq Khan to put up cameras and signs on roads that are managed by the council. So that's what the mayor has done. And you're correct, a number of councils have come together to, I think it's a judicial review, and Croydon is unable to justify it because we're only allowed to spend money on things that are sort of vital and statutory, with little flexibility on that. So we're not able to participate, although I think if we had the money, we would. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I mean, my own view is, and I did the same thing with 20-mile-an-hour speed limits and low traffic neighbourhoods, is I look at the evidence. I start out with an open mind on these things. And one of the great disappointments about the political things that I see is that typically a political decision is made and then the evidence is marshaled behind a decision already made, and anything to the contrary is denied. And I see Sadiq Khan's put out a 1-year review, but essentially it's something written from a political standpoint, and then he's run it past an academic to say it's been reviewed. I looked at it when it first came in, and the emissions are going down anyway as people replace their cars. But in central London, where you did have diesel cars, taxis and others sitting there chuntering away at traffic lights, it's a different situation in the outer boroughs, and these cars are, these non-compliant vehicles are coming down radically anyway. And I guess people like the Greens in particular will say that it's going to hurt the most vulnerable in society, there'll be premature deaths and the like. I think that's arguable, even if there isn't the downward trajectory will be altered very little, if at all, by this ULEZ, and what that impact might be is de minimis as far as I could see on the data. And it's very damaging for certain groups, and particularly in my ward, I have a lot of cafes and the like on the main road that goes through Selsdon. You get people, a lot of their passing trade in the mornings and in the evenings is people stopping off on their way to work, getting a bacon sandwich and a coffee. And if we lose that trade, that could be disastrous for our high streets here on the periphery. So I think it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and I think that nut could be a very small nut. I mean, in some things like with low traffic neighbourhoods, in my view, there are low traffic neighbourhoods that can work, and there is evidence to show that. But as usual, the Labour approach was, well, we'll just stick them anywhere. So doing something that makes things worse, if it fits the ideology, was fine by them. So I'm very much of the view in that particular one, for instance, is that it can work. I don't see the ULEZ is an appropriate use of his powers. Whether it's something, I don't know whether the exceeding powers, because the impact, of course, is it impacts people outside of the boundary. I guess that is what it might be. If you're regularly driving in from just outside and coming in, you've just imposed a tax on people who cannot vote for you. So I don't know what the legal case is, but as far as I'm concerned, good luck to them. There'll be a political judgment from the government as to whether that's good or bad politically. But to me, looking at the evidence, I think that would be the right thing to do.
Well, certainly, obviously, the Surrey County Council have got involved with the legal action. So they're presumably that's because they're concerned about, as you say, people travelling, just into, in this case, probably Croydon or other London boroughs, that border Surrey, and of course, similarly, somebody just driving just down the road, but within Croydon, just going into Surrey to a little chain of shops or what have you. That they'll also be affected. So it's not good whatsoever. Mike, as you say, we were out doing some leafleting the other week, and at a great deal of support where we were at. I think we've got some links on our website to various groups. What have we got there on this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. On our website, on the main sort of menu, there's a link to try and stop the ULEZ expansion. That takes you to links to various petitions, Facebook groups, some videos from the GLA, and other information on ULEZ and ability to check your. Takes you to the site to check your car. So it's a bit of a concentration point of information for people to have a look at. Encourage people to sign and get involved. We've also got some street stalls coming up, which we'll talk about the next one a bit later. Come along, help us. We're trying to get leaflets out to people to direct them to that and get them involved, get them looking at it. And with the greatest respect to Robert here as our resident politician for the day, you need to put pressure on politicians. You need to make them feel a bit nervous about how strong the feeling is out there about issues, and that's, I think, probably the best thing we can do with ULEZ is make the mayor concerned that there's going to be a backlash. Well,
unfortunately, we're moving from one form of charge, as it were, to the announcement that the council tax for Croydon residents is going to go up by 15% in the coming financial year. Croydon, to be fair, along with a couple of other councils, have been given special permission to go above the rate of increase that would require a referendum to do so. Obviously, Croydon is in special measures, shall we say, in terms of its finances. And so it's decided that this is the way to go to be able to balance the books. For those people slightly unfamiliar with what's gone on in Croydon over the last number of years, Robert, perhaps you could just take us through what went on under the previous administration.
Okay. Well, that's my mastermind specialist subject, so I hope I don't go on too much. Yeah, I mean, I got involved before I was really that involved in politics. What brought me in to a certain degree was an interest in the Fairfield Halls and the refurbishment that was being done there, because I think the Fairfield Halls was something that it's our flagship. It makes Croydon different. It's a cultural centre, which is not something that people generally think of with Croydon. So it's a very positive thing for us. And right from the start, and I there's documentary evidence that the Croydon Citizen doesn't exist anymore, but I wrote a number of articles for that, pointing out that I thought this didn't look right, what was going on. The council created an entity called Brick by Brick, which was a sort of 100% owned house builder. It was supposed to refurbish the Fairfield halls and build houses. So that was one arm of it, which has ended up costing, well, certainly tens of millions, at probably the thick end of 100 million. But there were a lot of other things going on as well. And I am still, every couple of weeks, things come out that are jaw-dropping. Once we took over the council, I thought, well, I'd seen all this appalling incompetence, certainly. And lack of control, and but just didn't seem to care about money being spent or budgets being met. The entire strategy was, as we've already discussed with Scotland, it was, evil Tory government has not given us enough money. And when the opposition said things about it, they say, how dare you, I'll take no instructions from you and your Tories, they're not giving us enough money. Now, I am absolutely of the view that we should tell government we're not getting enough money, but if and only if we're making the most of the money that we're getting. And they were not. In fact, they were doing the absolute opposite. And so, the whole thing was running out of control. And this has subsequently come out. Each year, there was, I don't know what's the best word, but anyway, a means was found to apparently balance the books. And those things are coming out, and there's a report coming out, I hope, this coming week on Thursday, by a gentleman called Richard Penn, which I hope will throw light on some of the things that did happen. But the council bought a hotel overpriced, which then went bust, so there was no revenue coming in. And that was an attempt to get cheap capital from government and use it to create revenue which could be spent to cover the shortfalls in general fund spending, which is the day-to-day spending. So the whole thing ran out of control, and we ended up with a debt that is unsustainable. I think the numbers are, we have 1.3 billion of debt on the general fund, 300 on the housing revenue account, so the total is 1.6 billion. And that is unsustainable. A sustainable level, I think, is in the sort of 800 or 900 range for Croydon. We're a big council. And the other thing is that we have no assets, not no assets, but a very limited number of assets. Other councils, you can have debt. Debt is fine if you're investing to produce a revenue, but if you're just spending, doing it to cover up the gaps in current spending, all that happens is it escalates out of control. So at the current level of debt, I think it's 50 million a year is being spent on debt servicing, whereas I think the council spends something of the order of 300 million, something like that. It's a substantial chunk. So yeah, we ended up with a bunch of debt, and the people of Croydon will end up paying for that for a long time. Now, I don't think the government has ever written off debts of a local council. But I think, basically said, look, we've cut all we can. We've done everything we possibly can. Many of these things very painful, and we can't solve the problem. So we've gone to the government with the support of the Improvement and Assurance panel that oversees us still, and said, look, we can't sort it out. Let's talk about how we can do that. And it's not being sorted out in the short term, I don't think. I think we'll have to ask for another what's called capitalisation direction. So we'll have to borrow more in order to fund our ongoing expenditure this year, and we've applied for the government to do that. But sometime over the next 12 months, the next fiscal year, something has to happen, and I don't know what that is. But we've sold all we can, we've cut all we can. We don't believe we can safely reduce expenditure any faster than we're already doing, and we're asking the government to help us. And part of that is an increase in the council tax. Now, we could have tried to salami slice it, and I'm told those other councils are doing that on the basis, well, we'll just put it up a bit this year and a bit next year and a bit the year after that. But that's, you know, death of 1,000 cuts. We have gone for this increase, which is a one-off, which will then take us into the, you know, back on the healing path. I hope and believe. So it is a big increase. It is very regrettable, but it is entirely a result of the ghastly mismanagement of certainly the last 5 years, but probably the entire 8 years of the previous Labour administration.
Well, Mike, I know we've been warning about this, the state of Croydon's finances even before it went bust. Unfortunately, this is what we get when people try to be a bit too clever with money, as they try to do with brick by brick. What have you made of this increase?
I'm increasingly making myself unpopular among friends and family by when being asked about this, and obviously people know I've taken a bit of an interest, saying, yeah, we've got to pay it. It's the natural consequence of us. And ironically, of course, I often say this to groups of people who probably didn't actually vote Labour, us electing the previous Labour administration twice. You know, they bankrupted our council, and it's only right. And I take Robert's point that probably it's just not fixable within Croydon by itself, but it is right that the people of Croydon pay for that. It's not the responsibility. We wouldn't expect to be lumbered for the bill by Bromley or Sutton or someone else. So, you know, unfortunately, we have to hit the bill for Croydon. Robert's mentioned the litany of problems there. If only someone was warning them. In fact, they were. I remember reading Robert's columns at the time. You know, they were warned. They knew what was going on. I was about to say they knew what they were doing. I kind of think they do know they were doing something terrible all the way through it. I remember at the time saying, I think it's worse than being corrupt. They actually believe in this stuff they're doing. You know, we don't know. We'll see what comes out of the Penn report, but I'm less convinced that that's the case anymore. Maybe they both enjoyed what they were doing, and there was a not entirely done by the book. Robert touched on something there about there's nothing wrong with having debt if you've got assets, and that is true. But Croydon to me was one of those examples of the great risk of that. They try to get revenue streams by buying commercial property, borrowing at low interest rates, and renting it on. And the Croydon Park Hotel and the Colonnades were great examples of that. But the market didn't have to change much. The margins were not so great that they would suddenly be losing money. And you know, we all know this. If you've bought a property, you know that, you know, if you put down a big deposit, you can sustain a change in numbers and still be in a reasonable place. If you put down a small deposit, it doesn't take much for it to go wrong. You know, it doesn't take much of an interest rate change for it to go wrong. Croydon Council put down no deposit. They borrowed all of the money. Lockdown came along, and the Croydon Park Hotel went bust. And I can't imagine there's a lot of money being made out of Colonnades at the moment. Croydon Council thought they knew better than people that had done this for a living how to make money out of these things, and it spectacularly backfired on the people of Croydon. So yeah, just bad news all round, and it is the natural consequence of what came before.
Indeed, and Robert, you say that this is you hope this is a one-off significant rise. So 15% this coming year. But with those sort of figures that you've mentioned in terms of the proportion of debt and the cost of servicing that debt every year, I think we can only hope that it is a one-off significant rise. We go back to more sensible rises, well, hopefully cut, but you know, that's perhaps fantastical in future years. You mentioned the Penn report potentially coming out soon, as in officially being released to the public. Jason Perry, the the now executive mayor of Croydon, has said that the council's appointments committee will meet on the 23rd of March, and on the basis of the Penn report and indeed another report that's being done into the Fairfield Halls debacle. And I'm going to read this directly so I don't get into any legal trouble. They're going to consider referring former members and officers to the police and their professional bodies for their part in the council's financial failure, and also consider whether legal action can be taken to recover the monies paid to the former chief executive under her settlement agreement. Obviously, we have to be careful what we say from a legal perspective, but I'd say they're pretty strong words.
They certainly are, and he came out and said them. I was sort of, I'm not on that committee. I'm not party to that information. I felt for a very long time that it was something where that the police would have been the best people to be investigating. But what constitutes due process and the like, and this is something I'm not able to give an opinion on, and I haven't got anybody that I haven't got the money to pay somebody to give me one, so I leave it in the hands of the committee there, and what the mayor has said. I think that's very good indeed. We have to put this to bed somehow. We've had so many reports. There was non-statutory review, that we've had accountants' reports, we've had auditors' reports. We're now going to have the Penn one. It has. I can't think that there's another report that's got to be done. That we've either got to decide to do some of these things or not, and we have to do that as far as possible in public, because there is a lot of anger out there, and I'm angry too. I'm going to have to pay a big chunk of council tax, and I'm angry that Westfield didn't happen. I've been round the Fairfield halls. I've seen some of the things that are still there, that you go, how could anybody do this? And so yes, I think we have to. Well, I look forward to reading the Richard Penn report, and I hope that I put trust in the committee there. I just quickly go back to the thing about the Croydon Park Hotel, though. To me, it's all about risk and what your financial strength is. If you're a financially strong council, you could buy the Croydon Park Hotel at some sort of price in the knowledge that it was already struggling. And if you can stand the loss of the income, you have an asset that potentially, somebody can build on, and it would be an asset for it. But when you're Croydon Council, you overpay for something in order to get the revenue. You take a big risk that goes bust, and you don't have the reserves and the backing to stand that, because that's something about risk investment. So, for me, it's not just buying the Croydon Park Hotel in and of itself was not a bad thing. The fact that it was done when it was clearly a high risk investment and at the price it was is what I think would be my concern. But yes, this that and all these other things. I mean, the Fairfield Halls was the one I kept going on about. I was happy that was. I thought at the time to have a report done by Kroll. This is the forensic accountants, or I'm not sure what they call themselves, who will report at the meeting on March the 23rd, which is the kind of last piece of information to enable that committee to make a decision. The Fairfield Halls and how that was managed and how it was financed was diagnostic of the way the council was run. So, they've got all the information. I look forward to hearing what they decide to do with great interest.
Yes, watch this space, as it were. We'll wait with bated breath.
Yes, indeed.
So, Mike, we've got quite a bit on our website at the moment that people may want to take a look at.
We have quickly talked through a few articles we've got up there. We interviewed the Tax Reform Council. They're an organisation that encourages greater economic growth and places a lower burden on individuals and businesses of tax. really interesting, very sound organisation. Well worth having a read through and look at them. As I mentioned earlier, I've recently been on a trip to Israel and just wrote up a short article. What I found there, how I found it to be a very straightforward place. A little bit about Israeli politics as well. You might find that interesting. Well worth a visit if you get the opportunity. Reform UK, they've now got an organiser in Surrey, Roscoe Patterson. We've got an appeal for him for candidates and assistants in the upcoming local elections in May. So if you're interested in reform, have a look at that. We've been talking about the 15% council tax rise. We put out a statement really outlining much of what's been said today, but that's on our website. Again, feel free to have a look. Someone we've worked with lots over the years, David Curtin. He's the leader of the Heritage Party. We took the chance to interview him again, see where things are. He's now a regular on GB News. If you're interested in what David's been up to, have an interesting read on what he's doing. And then lastly, in terms of articles on the website, I discovered earlier in this year, actually late last year, that Hello had its 40th anniversary. It was on the 30th of December last year. So I wrote up a little piece about Hello, the TV show, and really how the mockery we used to be able to take of evil and the Nazis and what have you. We used to know how to deal with these people and put them in their place. And my feeling, perhaps we don't anymore. So it might interest you and remember a few of the older catchphrases from it.
It's not just website articles we've got, is it? We've got a couple of events coming up.
We have indeed. So a couple of events. We mentioned our ULEZ leafleting. Well, next up, we're in Sutton on the 25th of February, on Saturday, the 25th of February, out from 10:30 to 1 p.m. outside Waterstones. We'll be leafleting and trying to get people to recognise the concerns with ULEZ and get involved. We also have our regular 15th of March drinks, regular third Wednesday drinks on Wednesday, the 15th of March, 7 p.m. at the George. Come along if you can. We will have some more ULEZ street events going on. Have a look at the website when you get the chance, and hopefully you can come along and help out.
Well, if you'd like to write for our website or have any stories you'd like us to cover, please do contact us. You can do so via the Twitter @CroydonConst, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalist@gmail.com. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the pubcast, and indeed the YouTube channel. Do please like, share, and leave a review. It's always good to get feedback, and it helps others to find the podcast. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Robert. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, guys. Enjoyed it.
And thank you to everybody for listening. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Goodbye.